The wine was open, candles lit, his favorite jazz playing low in the background. I reached for the matches and saw the bottle. White label, blue cap, and her name not mine, Evelyn Carlisle. He told me he was done with her, that she barely noticed him anymore, that I was different. But that bottle, that was no accident. Where in the world are you listening from? Drop your city in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that uncover the truth. My name is Harper Winslow. I'm 41. A lighting designer by trade, someone who's always worked behind the scenes, never the one in the spotlight. After my divorce, I built my life around stillness, afternoon light through old curtains, records spinning on low, work that let me shape shadows and warmth for other people. And for a while, that was enough. Then came Owen Carlisle. We met at a hospital, benefit I designed lighting for. He came up after the event, said the lights made the room feel like a dream. Said it had been years since he felt that way. He was polished, measured, kind in the way men rarely are without wanting something. He said I made him feel alive again. Said his marriage had been over for years, but he stayed because of Maisie, his daughter. Because Evelyn would fall apart if the truth came out. Because he needed time. Time, that was what he asked of me, and I gave it. We met quietly. Wine in old hotels. Walks on foggy mornings through the squares of Savannah. He held my hand like I was the only person who mattered. And I wanted to believe I was. He'd send me poems late at night, lines from Rilke, Neruda, once a quote that said, "There are days we live as if death were nowhere in the background." At the time, I thought it was romantic. Now, I wonder what else he meant by it. He never let me meet anyone in his life. Not coworkers, not friends, certainly not his daughter. But he said that was to protect me, to keep our world clean while he wrapped up the mess. And maybe I wanted to stay in the clean part. Maybe I didn't ask too many questions because I liked how I felt when I was with him. Until one evening he slipped up. We were cooking together something simple, roasted chicken and red potatoes. The jazz station hummed in the background. He reached for the wine, kissed the top of my head, and then said her name, Evelyn. Just a whisper, so soft I almost thought I imagined it, but I didn't, because his hands froze for half a second. I didn't ask. He apologized, said he was tired. That work had drained him. And I let it go, but something shifted after that. In him, in me, in the silence between our dinners. He was still sweet, but less present. His phone vibrated more. He started checking the clock. Our time together felt measured, like there was something he was winding up for, and I was too caught up in the fantasy to step back and ask. What if I wasn't the beginning, but the cover-up? It started with something small. He said he was flying to Raleigh for a surgical symposium, just overnight. He kissed me before leaving a quick practice thing, the kind that feels tender until you replay it in your mind. That evening, I stopped by the bakery near my apartment. The owner, Lorna, was closing up. We chatted about her husband's back pain. She asked how my quiet guy was doing. I smiled, told her he was out of town. She frowned. He's not, she said casually. I just saw him an hour ago, down on Whitaker Street. He was getting coffee with some woman. Brunette, I thought it was you. I laughed, too quickly, said maybe she was mistaken, that Owen had a colleague who looked a bit like me, but inside something pinched. Later that night I texted him, made it to Raleigh. It took him 20 minutes to reply, just 2 words. Settled in. I stared at the screen, the lie sat there still warm. I opened a map, checked the weather in Raleigh, rainy, but it was dry here. He hadn't mentioned rain, he always mentioned weather. He liked packing light, bragged about it. I zoomed in on the symposium's website. There was no event scheduled that week, nothing since March. I clicked around, opened old texts. In one of them months ago, he'd mentioned speaking at a panel, same venue. I remembered thinking, he's respected. He's trusted. How lucky am I to be chosen by a man like this? Now I wasn't so sure. I told myself maybe he got the dates wrong. Maybe it was a last-minute reschedule. Maybe the woman on Whitaker Street wasn't Evelyn. But I knew, not because I had proof yet, but because my body knew before my mind did. My appetite left me. My hands felt cold even in the sun. And when he called the next evening, his voice sounded just a little too careful. "Miss me?" he asked. Soft, familiar, designed to melt. And for a second I wanted to let it, because love doesn't leave all at once. It unravels thread by thread until you're sitting in silence holding the last stitch of who you thought they were. But something in me had started to harden. Not out of anger, not yet, out of instinct, like my bones knew I was standing on ice and something beneath it had just cracked. Would you confront him now, or wait until you were sure? A week later, he brought me takeout from a Thai place we loved. He set it on the table like nothing had shifted. "Everything okay at the hospital?" I asked casually. He nodded. "I'm exhausted. We had a code blue in recovery today." The intern froze. It was a mess. I remember how calm his voice was. No tremble, no pause. He said it like he'd said it before. 3 days later, I had coffee with a friend, Erin. She's a pediatric nurse. Different department, same building. We were talking about something else entirely when she mentioned Owen in passing. Saw him last week. He looked relaxed. Said he'd taken a few days off. Stayed home for some mental reset. I didn't respond right away. Just stirred my coffee until the spoon clinked louder than it should have. I waited until I got home to check. Opened my phone. Scrolled through our texts. He told me about that code blue on Tuesday, but Erin said he wasn't even at the hospital. He'd told her he was home on leave. One of them was lying, but it wasn't her. I went back further, pulled up an old voicemail from last month, Owen explaining why he couldn't meet me that night. "We had a crisis in the OR," he said. "Lost a patient. It shook everyone up." That was the first time. This was the second. The same story, almost word for word. And this time, he wasn't even there. It wasn't just that he lied. It was that he reused the lie, recycled the pain like it belonged to him, like crisis was currency. And I'd accepted it because I wanted to believe he lived in a world that needed him, that he was important, overwhelmed, human. But this wasn't human, this was control. There's something about repetition that makes truth come undone. When they say the same thing twice in the same tone with the same inflection, you realize they're not talking to you. They're performing for you. That night, I didn't say anything, just let him hold me. His heartbeat felt steady, too steady, like a rhythm I no longer trusted. Have you ever caught someone telling the same lie twice and smiled through it? It was just a folded receipt. Nothing dramatic, not a lipstick stain or a love letter, just paper. But it had her name on it. We were at his condo. He was in the shower. I'd offered to clean up the kitchen, not because it needed it, but because I needed to do something with my hands. I was starting to feel like a background prop in my own life. He kept a leather tray by the microwave. Loose change, spare keys, receipts. I reached to toss a gum wrapper and saw it. A pharmacy bag, still folded, still warm from his coat pocket. I opened it. Inside, a receipt from Darlington Pharmacy, date 2 days ago, item midazolam, 15 mg, patient name, Evelyn Carlisle. It felt like my lungs turned solid. Not my name, not a pet, not a patient. His wife. I stood there holding it. Steam drifted from the bathroom. Jazz still played softly from the living room speaker. Everything looked normal. Everything sounded normal. But that paper burned through my fingers like acid. I slid it back exactly how I found it. Careful, precise, like a stagehand resetting a scene before the next act begins. That night I didn't ask him about it. Didn't mention the pharmacy. Didn't say her name. I wanted to see what he would say. And he did talk about stress, about the hospital budget, about politics in the boardroom. But not about her. It was a silence too clean, too curated. So I looked up the medication, midazolam, a sedative strong, used for surgery prep, sometimes for seizures, sometimes for things much darker. I searched again, typed in keywords midazolam misuse. Can it be fatal with alcohol spousal poisoning cases? What I found chilled me more than the receipt itself. Suddenly his dinner plans made sense. The wine, the careful lighting, his insistence on that exact bottle, the one she used to love. The night wasn't meant for romance. It was meant for control, maybe even for erasure. Would you have shown her the receipt, or waited until you were certain what he planned to do? He was never careless, not with words, not with time, not with me. But digital footprints, that's where even the most precise men make mistakes. Owen had asked me a few weeks back to help him adjust the lighting layout in a patient recovery presentation. Something about feeling too cold, too clinical. He emailed it to me on a shared drive. I remember thinking it was sweet the way he respected my taste. He never removed access, and I never deleted the folder. I didn't go looking for anything, not at first. I just opened the drive out of reflex, like touching something familiar to calm myself down. But then I saw a new folder. June 15, dinner prep. Created 3 days ago. I paused. Clicked once, inside notes, images, a checklist titled Controlled Environment, and a document named Dosage Tolerance Weight Comparison Final. I opened it. There in neat clinical language was a chart of sedative tolerances, weight brackets, estimated alcohol levels, timing intervals, all color-coded, and beneath it a handwritten line scanned into the file. With wine delay onset, 18-25 minute, risk low if supervised. I scrolled to the top, test subject EC. I didn't need to guess. EC was Evelyn Carlisle, the wife, the woman he said couldn't let go, the one he claimed was too fragile for the truth. But she wasn't fragile. He was methodical, cold. This wasn't about passion. This was planning. And now I had proof. Digital, traceable, time-stamped. I downloaded everything, backed it up to a USB, labeled it something plain, tax docs. That night I lay in bed beside him. His breathing was steady. He reached for me in his sleep, murmured something I couldn't quite hear. I watched the ceiling, counted each breath, thought of Evelyn, her name on a bottle, her weight on a chart, her life measured in milligrams and minutes. I had the truth now, but truth is only power if you decide what to do with it. Would you confront the man in your bed, or take the evidence and walk away without a word? I asked to meet her in a public place, neutral, quiet, a small bookshop cafe on Habersham. Weekday morning, no music, just the low clink of mugs and the sound of pages turning. Evelyn arrived exactly on time. Pressed blouse, no makeup, not a woman unraveling, but one who'd learned to hold her pieces in place. She looked at me once and said, "I've known about you for months." I didn't speak. She sipped her tea, then added, "I thought he'd get bored, or that you were just another distraction before tax season." But then he started buying wine again, the kind I used to drink. I reached into my bag, pulled out the USB, slid it across the table. She didn't touch it right away, just stared. That's everything I said quietly. Receipts, notes, dosage charts, your name, in his own files. Her eyes flickered, but no tears, no gasps. Just silence, heavy, intentional. After a moment, she asked, "Do you believe he ever loved you?" I paused, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I finally did. "No," I said, "and I don't think he knows how to." She nodded, took the USB, stood, and before walking out, she said just one thing: "Let's give him the evening he's been planning for." That was the moment, the point of no return, not when I found the file, not when I saw the bottle, But when I realized she wasn't broken, she was ready, and so was I. We didn't speak again for 2 days. No calls, no texts, no whispered coordination, just time quiet and deliberate. Then an email, no greeting, no sign-off, just a sentence from Evelyn. He's planning the dinner for Friday, and attached an image, a bottle of 2011 Brunello, my favorite, her favorite, apparently his poison of choice. I stared at the photo for a long time, not because of the wine, but because of the napkin underneath. It was embroidered, gold thread on soft ivory. The Magnolia Hall. I knew the place. Everyone in Savannah did. Old-world chandeliers, velvet chairs, service so quiet, it felt like a confession. He booked the private room for an intimate celebration he'd said weeks ago. 15 years of marriage, he told me. A goodbye to the old life, a toast to what comes next. I thought he meant us. I see now he meant control. The next day I texted him, asked what I should wear. He replied in seconds. Anything you feel beautiful in. It almost made me laugh. Even now he dressed his intentions in compliments. I forwarded the message to Evelyn. She responded with one line. I'll be there. Then the work began. I combed through every file I'd downloaded, renamed them, labeled each folder for clarity. One called prescriptions, one called protocol notes, one simply titled intention. I printed the email threads, highlighted his exact words. On one he wrote, "It'll be painless. She'll feel light, like falling asleep." That sentence alone told me everything about how he viewed us. Women weren't people to Owen. We were phases, steps, means. We agreed on the timing. He would pour the wine at 7:30. Vivian Evelyn would toast first. I'd play my role, the mistress in the shadows, invited as a gesture of ending things well. It wasn't hard to act like I was still in love with him. I didn't have to cry. I didn't have to beg. I just had to stay still. That was always the trick with Owen. Stillness made him feel safe. It gave him the illusion of control. But we also knew him. He loved a perfect ending. He craved applause, even if only from himself. And this time he would get it, just not the kind he expected. The morning of the dinner, I stood in front of my closet. Everything felt wrong, too soft, too hopeful. I chose black, not because it was slimming, but because it felt like armor. A sleeveless shift-high neckline, no jewelry, no distractions. I checked the USB one last time, labeled it tax docs, just in case. Slipped it into a small box wrapped in brown paper tied with twine. It looked like a polite hostess gift, but it wasn't. In the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Not because I looked different, but because I didn't flinch. My hands didn't shake, my breath didn't catch. That version of me, the one who believed him, was already gone. At 6:45, I arrived at Magnolia Hall. The maitre d' led me upstairs past oil paintings and candlelight. The private room was ready, one long table, 3 place settings. Evelyn was already there, hair down, face still. We didn't hug, we didn't speak. We just waited. He arrived at 7:12. Always early, always composed. His jacket-tailored shoes polished and a smile practiced to disarm. He kissed my cheek. Told me I looked stunning, then turned to Evelyn and gave her a nod, like she was a polite stranger, not the woman he lived with for 15 years. She didn't flinch, just smiled, tight, unbothered, like she'd already said goodbye days ago. He slid into his seat across from us like this was any other dinner, like nothing inside the room was about to devour him. A server poured the wine. Brunello, room temperature, breathable, decanted 2 hours earlier, just the way he liked it. We made small talk, the 3 of us, like a scene from some dark comedy where no one breaks the fourth wall. He asked about my work. Evelyn asked about the art exhibit downtown. I mentioned the light installation. Owen nodded, said he missed my eye for detail. I wanted to laugh. Instead, I asked if we could make a toast before the entrees arrived. He agreed immediately, Ladies first, he said, smiling at Evelyn. She nodded, lifted her glass, held it level, not a tremble in her fingers. To new beginnings, she said. Her voice was smooth, not raised, not dramatic. To choosing clarity over comfort, truth over illusion, and to letting go of stories that were never ours to begin with. She looked at me. I raised my glass in return. Owen chuckled lightly. Sounds like something out of a therapist's blog, he said, reaching for the bottle to refill her glass. But Evelyn held up a hand. One more thing, she said, reaching under the table. She placed a small speaker beside her plate, pressed play. His voice. Clear, undeniable. It'll be painless. She'll feel light, like falling asleep. Then the next one, and with wine delay on set, 25 minutes tops. Risk is low if supervised. Owen froze, his hand still on the bottle. Eyes darted to mine, then to hers, then to the server who had gone ghost pale in the corner. No one moved. Even the candle flame seemed to flicker more slowly. Evelyn pulled the USB from her bag, set it on the table between the plates, next to the wine. I made copies, she said simply. One went to your hospital's board, one to a lawyer, one to your daughter, eventually. He stood up, knocked his chair back, mouth open but no words came out. The control was gone, and he had nothing left to use. Not his charm, not his lies, not us. You planned a toast, she said calmly. We just beat you to it. He looked down at the USB, didn't touch it, didn't ask what else we had. He didn't finish his wine, didn't threaten, didn't beg. Just walked out, like a man suddenly aware he had no place to stand. Silence followed him out like a slow curtain fall. No applause, no closing line. When the door clicked shut, Evelyn finally exhaled. A long, tired breath she'd probably been holding for years. I looked at her. She looked at me. And for the first time, we weren't the wife or the other woman. We were witnesses to each other's clarity, to a truth finally uncaged. She raised her glass again, didn't say a word. I clinked mine softly against hers. Thank you, she whispered. I shook my head. No, thank you for not letting him finish the story. Outside, the wind was picking up, a storm rolling in from the coast. But inside that room, something had already broken, and something else had quietly begun. The next morning, he didn't call. He didn't text, didn't email, didn't send flowers or some pitiful line like "let's talk." He just disappeared. Which in hindsight was the most honest thing he ever did. But silence doesn't mean nothing's happening. Sometimes silence is just the sound of a system collapsing one institution at a time. By noon, Evelyn's lawyer had already forwarded the files to the hospital's ethics board. By 3 p.m., the board had called an emergency session. Internal emails leaked quietly but deliberately. By sundown, his license was under review. But I didn't celebrate, not yet. I went home, took off the black dress, and folded it slowly, not like a keepsake, more like a uniform after the final shift. I opened every curtain in the apartment, let light in like water into a drained space, and I sat. For hours, no music, no phone. Just stillness like the quiet after a storm before anyone realizes the trees are gone. I thought about the look on his face as the recording played. Not panic, not guilt, confusion. As if he truly didn't understand why it was wrong. Why we were wrong. Why any of this couldn't be spun into just another misunderstood chapter. He never saw himself as dangerous, just necessary, important. The man with the plan who'd convinced himself that sacrifice was always someone else's burden. And for a while I helped him believe that. That part still burns, because the truth is betrayal doesn't always come in screaming matches or slamming doors. Sometimes it's just small nods, little silences, moments when you don't ask the question you're scared to hear the answer to. I was complicit in my own erasure, but not anymore. That night I received one message, not from Owen, but from someone unexpected. Maisie, 12 years old, braver than most adults I know. It was a voice memo, short, shaky, unscripted. Hi, Miss Harper, I know who you are now. I know what my dad did. My mom says you helped. So, thank you. I'm okay. Just wanted to say that. I played it 3 times, each time slower. Not because I needed to hear it again, but because I needed to believe that clarity could be inherited. That when the lie ends, someone is watching. And they remember who told the truth. The hospital acted quickly. By the end of the week, Owen's medical license was suspended pending investigation. The media didn't explode, not at first. Just a quiet headline on a regional health board memo. Noted neurosurgeon under review for ethics violation. But the whispers spread faster. And in a city like Savannah, whispers carry farther than shouts. His colleagues started pulling away. Patients canceled consultations. A speaking engagement in Atlanta was postponed indefinitely. The last public photo of him was at a gas station, baseball cap pulled low, looking smaller somehow. Evelyn didn't issue a statement. She didn't need to. The USB had spoken for her. Instead, she filed for divorce and moved into a smaller place across town. Quiet neighborhood, better for Maisie. She started volunteering at a women's advocacy center. Didn't tell anyone, but I found out through a friend. That felt right, like she'd taken everything he tried to erase and turned it into something that could shelter someone else. As for me, some friends pulled back, the kind who preferred simple stories where there's a villain, a victim, and nothing in between. Others, mostly women I hadn't spoken to in years, reached out quietly. I saw the article. I've been there too. Thank you for speaking up. But I hadn't spoken up, not publicly. I didn't go to the press, didn't write a tell-all. All I did was stop pretending. That was enough. I left Savannah for a while. Spent 3 months in Asheville, subletting a tiny cottage with creaky floors and ivy swallowing the porch. I read more, cooked for no one, lit candles even when I was alone. Not for romance, for ritual. Evelyn sent one message, just once. It was a photo, a corner of her desk, a stack of printed legal documents, and next to it the bottle of Brunello, still sealed, untouched. Underneath the caption, kept it, to remember what I almost drank. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Some silences are earned. And Owen? I never saw him again, but I imagine he wakes up differently now in a house too quiet, a phone that doesn't ring, and a reputation he can't rebuild because it was never based on truth. He used to say I brought light into the room, that I made things feel vivid. But here's the thing about light. It doesn't love you back. It only shows what's already there. I didn't rebuild my life. That implies I wanted it back the way it was. What I did was burn it down completely, then walk away from the ashes without looking over my shoulder. I moved to Beaufort. Small town, soft light. Not the kind of place where people ask why a woman lives alone or why she drinks her morning coffee in silence. I opened a small studio near the harbor. Lighting design still but simpler now. Event spaces, intimate galleries. Places where people stand in quiet and feel something real without needing to name it. I stopped decorating around other people's comfort, started trusting my own taste again. Most days I bike to work. A short path past the marsh where the reeds lean like they're listening. I like that. I don't check the news much anymore. I don't need to. Some stories end with headlines, some don't. But mine had ended in a dining room with wine no one drank, and a man who thought he'd written the final scene. Turns out the story was never his to end. Evelyn and I haven't spoken in months. Not because of anger, but because peace doesn't always look like friendship. Sometimes it's just mutual distance without resentment. Maisie sent a postcard once, a drawing of a lighthouse. No note, just that image. It's pinned above my desk now, right between 2 sketches for a lighting installation I'm designing for the city library. A lighthouse, steady, unmoving, built to warn people away from danger, not drag them toward it. I think there's beauty in that. I don't date. Not seriously. Not yet. I'm not waiting for anyone. Just breathing at my own pace now. Some nights I sit on the porch bare feet on cool wood glass of iced tea in hand. And I remember the woman I used to be, the one who waited for the truth to come softly. But the truth doesn't whisper. Not really. It cracks. It cuts. And then if you're lucky, it clears the space for something honest to grow. So no, I didn't rebuild my life. I built a different one. Quieter, wider, and finally mine.